Hey, this is Tony from the Cold Case Project, where we focus on unsolved cases across the United States. Our mission is to bring attention to these unresolved mysteries that need your help. All the information we cover in these cases is readily available on the internet, but we rewrite and repurpose it for the purpose of these videos. Our goal is to spread the word about the thousands of unsolved cold cases still out there. Thank you for watching. If you want to help shed light on these cases, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Your support can make a difference.
Jeremy Alex, a 28-year-old white male with brown hair and eyes, was last seen around April 24th or 25th, 2004, in Northport, Maine. Standing at 5 feet 7 inches and weighing 150 pounds, Jeremy had recently moved to the area to live with his girlfriend, Suzanne, whom he had been with for 3 years. During this period, Suzanne was living in a different residence in Northport, soon to move into a house with Jeremy. The items Jeremy was known to be carrying at the time of his disappearance included a red backpack, an olive green timber sweatshirt, blue jeans, and black Puma shoes in size 8.5. At the time of his disappearance, Jeremy was described as a free spirit and a caring individual, close with his family. Despite a troubled youth, Jeremy had become well put together in his late 20s. His family believed things were going well for him, as he was in a stable relationship and preparing to move into a new home with Suzanne. However, what started as a hopeful new chapter soon turned into a haunting mystery. On Saturday, April 24th, Jeremy's girlfriend, Suzanne, reported the last confirmed sighting of him. She said he had shown up at her residence that morning, visibly upset and frustrated. Jeremy appeared to believe that Suzanne and a friend had taunted him the previous night, standing outside his window wearing ski masks. In addition to this, he was convinced that people were after him and wanted to harm him. His erratic behavior was alarming, and Susan was upset by his accusations. His mood fluctuated rapidly, going from angry to comforting to agitated within a short period. Later that day, Jeremy was seen packing up furniture at Suzanne's house to transport to their new residence. By the time they parted ways, they were not on good terms. Suzanne didn't contact Jeremy's family about his strange behavior, choosing to keep the matter to herself. She believed his behavior was likely the result of his drug use, which she later confirmed. Suzanne mentioned that Jeremy had been using drugs, particularly cocaine and heroin, leading up to his disappearance. A friend of Jeremy's also confirmed this, stating that they had used both drugs together on the evening of Friday, April 23rd. The friend reported that Jeremy was spiraling out of control with his substance use, and that he desperately needed to stop. This, too, aligned with Suzanne's account of Jeremy's behavior in the days before he vanished. Around midday on April 24th, Jeremy was spotted by a motorist traveling along Pound Hill Road. The motorist reported seeing Jeremy speaking to 2 men in a red pickup truck. This is an important detail, as Jeremy's abandoned vehicle was later discovered near this location. Pound Hill Road was known for drug activity, which made the sighting more suspicious. Later that afternoon, at around 5:20 p.m., a former high school teacher of Jeremy's saw him acting strangely in her garden. She described him as panicking, clutching money, and repeatedly saying that bad guys were going to hurt him. Despite her attempts to restrain Jeremy and offer him help, he ran off into the woods. The teacher and her husband contacted the authorities about the incident, but no immediate follow-up occurred. After leaving the former teacher's house, Jeremy was seen by another woman driving along Route 1. She saw him crossing the road ahead of her and noticed him again crossing back over after she had passed. This was the last confirmed sighting of Jeremy. The following day, Sunday, April 25th, 2004, Jeremy's car was discovered by authorities in a small park area off Pound Hill Road. Inside the vehicle were his keys and mobile phone, both of which were unusual to be left behind. The car's location was concerning, as it was situated near the woods, and Jeremy's whereabouts remained unknown. Ted, Jeremy's father, received a missed call and voicemail from Jeremy's phone around this time. However, the voicemail was not from Jeremy, but from the police, who asked Ted to call them. Ted soon received the news that Jeremy's car had been found and was instructed to head to the police station. Upon arriving at the station, Ted learned that Suzanne had also been notified of Jeremy's disappearance. She went to check the house that she and Jeremy were in the process of moving into. Upon entering the house, Suzanne found the door open with the keys still in the lock. She proceeded to go inside and flush out or remove any evidence of drug use, something she later admitted to police when she realized that Jeremy might not be coming back. While Suzanne's actions may seem suspicious, Jeremy's family does not suspect her involvement in his disappearance. She was simply trying to cover up the drug use, unaware that it would become a significant part of the investigation. On Monday, April 26, 2004, a widespread search of the woods around Pound Hill Road was launched. The search included volunteers, officers, a dog unit, and tracking systems, but no trace of Jeremy was found. Over the next few months, additional searches of the area yielded no significant findings. Suzanne believed that Jeremy would have been capable of surviving in the woods for a short period, as he was familiar with survival tactics. However, as the weeks and months passed, Jeremy's family began to suspect that foul play was involved. The police also began investigating Jeremy's drug connections, trying to determine if a drug deal gone wrong or a drug debt could have led to his disappearance. Unfortunately, no one was willing to provide information about Jeremy's drug use or who he might have been buying drugs from. As the investigation stalled, Jeremy's family continued to keep his case in the media, posting flyers and offering a $20,000 reward for any information. This led to numerous false tips, but none of them provided credible leads. 2 years after Jeremy's disappearance, the Maine State Police conducted a search of Knight's Pond in Northport, after someone claimed that Jeremy had been murdered and his body dumped there. However, nothing was found at the pond. In April 2008, for years after Jeremy vanished, a couple living on Northport Beach discovered Jeremy's driver's license and money. These items were found shortly after Jeremy's disappearance, but the couple had kept them in their collection of found objects, unaware of their significance. The items were finally turned over to the police. However, due to the time lapse, it was too late to search the surrounding area of the ocean or woods where Jeremy might have ended up. The items were found in an area near a cliff, which raised the possibility that Jeremy's body had been washed into the ocean. Despite extensive searches of the beach, no further clues were discovered. There are several theories surrounding Jeremy's disappearance. One possibility is that Jeremy was murdered due to a drug deal gone wrong or a drug debt. His body may have been dumped or his possessions tossed off a cliff into the ocean, explaining why his license and money were found on Northport Beach. Another theory suggests that Jeremy may have been hallucinating due to drug use and accidentally fell or jumped off the cliff, drowning in the ocean. There is also the possibility that Jeremy died as a result of his delusions, whether from suicide or from the mental and physical toll of his drug use. His family is still reluctant to believe this theory, as they believe foul play is more likely. The woods around Pound Hill are extensive, and it's possible that Jeremy's body is still hidden somewhere in the dense forest, waiting to be found. Some members of the family cling to the idea that Jeremy may have run away, discarded his belongings, and is alive somewhere, though this seems less likely given the circumstances of his disappearance. As of now, Jeremy Alex's disappearance remains unsolved. Thomas Jacoby disappeared from his father's home in Gretna, Pennsylvania on July 1, 1991. He had been working odd jobs at the local high school and planned to leave for work that day, but he never returned home. Jacoby had never stayed away from home without informing his parents, which raised immediate concern. The day after his disappearance, Jacoby's girlfriend received a letter from him, which had been mailed locally. In the letter, Jacoby explained he had been struggling emotionally for 2 years and felt the need to leave. He mentioned that she would probably never see him again, and asked her to forward the letter to his father. A second letter arrived a few days later, postmarked from Portland, Maine, where Jacoby stated he had driven 700 miles. He described camping out near Millinocket, Maine, where he could hear the calls of loons. In this letter, Jacoby mentioned that he had made a mess of things and wasn't where he wanted to be yet, but would be in a day or two. The letter was signed with his initials, TJ, a rare signature for him. Jacoby added a chilling statement that by the time his girlfriend received the letter, he would have been dead for 2 days. Jacoby's family had been going through significant struggles around this time. His parents had divorced in 1980, and his mother, with whom he was close, had moved out of state just days before his disappearance. His sister had moved away to graduate school, and Jacoby's friends had all graduated and were going their separate ways. The letters indicated that Jacoby may have been deeply distressed by these changes in his life. His girlfriend believed the mess referred to family turmoil. However, no one close to him had any idea that he was planning to leave or was facing such difficulties. In November 1991, Jacoby's car was found abandoned in a public parking area near Millinocket Lake in Maine. The vehicle had been parked there since August, and inside the locked car were his wallet, car keys, and some loose change, including Canadian currency. Notably missing from the car were Jacoby's backpack, sleeping bag, tent, a second set of car keys, a .38 caliber pistol, and his bicycle. Later, Jacoby's sleeping bag and tent were discovered in a trash bin in the Twin Hills picnic area on Milo Road, but the find wasn't reported to the police until November 1992. The following day, Jacoby's bicycle was discovered in a remote wooded area near Millinocket Lake, appearing to have been abandoned hastily. The pistol was never found. Jacoby was known for his love of the outdoors, enjoying activities such as hunting, fishing, and sports. His family knew him to be responsible and not involved with drugs or alcohol, making his sudden disappearance all the more puzzling. There was speculation that Jacoby may have been trying to hike the Appalachian Trail, which has a northern entrance in Baxter State Park, near Millinocket. There were possible sightings of him on the trail, but none were ever confirmed. Despite extensive search efforts, Jacoby's body has never been found. His family hopes he is still alive, but his case remains unsolved. Faye Johnson was last seen in Bethel, Maine on March 7, 2012. At the time of her disappearance, she was in the process of moving from a residence on Bates Street in Lewiston, Maine to an apartment on Vernon Street in Bethel. Johnson has never been heard from again. Prior to her disappearance, Johnson's vehicle, a green 2004 Subaru Forester, had been wrecked and was undrivable. However, it is believed that she took the car's vanity license plate, which read Sassafge. Since her car was no longer operational, Johnson relied on friends for transportation. In a further unusual development, Johnson left behind her therapy dog, Sassy, at the Bethel residence, which is highly out of character for her. 5 days after her disappearance, the landlord contacted an animal control officer, who removed Sassy from the home. It was only at that point that Johnson's disappearance was reported to the authorities. Johnson's health conditions, which required her to rely on her therapy dog, as well as the fact that her cellular phone was turned off and there was no money left in her bank account, raised immediate concerns. Witnesses reported seeing someone they believed to be Johnson in the local area after her disappearance, but she appeared to be acting confused. Johnson's purse, identification, and cellular phone were all left behind, which is considered highly uncharacteristic of her. Due to her medical conditions and the fact that she left without warning, authorities believe she is in danger. Despite these concerns, foul play is not suspected in her case at this time. Faye Johnson's case remains unsolved, and authorities continue to investigate her disappearance. Given the circumstances surrounding her leaving behind her belongings and her health concerns, there is growing concern for her well-being. Her case remains open, and law enforcement is seeking any information regarding her whereabouts. Johnson, a welder originally from Pennsylvania, relocated to Kittery, Maine in 1977, seeking a new life and career. He secured a job at Donnelly Manufacturing in Exeter, New Hampshire, and made his home in a cabin on Jewett Court in Kittery. Johnson lived a relatively quiet life, maintaining a steady routine and keeping in contact with his family. However, that routine was shattered when he went missing under strange circumstances in February 1983. On February 3, 1983, Johnson went to work at Donnelly Manufacturing as usual. At the end of his shift, he left the factory, but the following day, he didn't show up for work or call in to explain his absence. His failure to contact either his employer or his family raised immediate concern, as it was uncharacteristic of him to disappear without notice. The situation became even more perplexing when, on February 4th, one of Johnson's neighbors reported seeing a young man with black hair and a mustache, wearing a black leather jacket and dark-colored pants, knocking on Johnson's door. This individual was allowed inside, and shortly after, he was seen leaving the house on foot. After Johnson's disappearance, there was a series of strange financial transactions linked to him. Someone, either Johnson or an imposter, visited his bank and drained his account, then used the funds to buy $146 worth of groceries at a store in Stratham, New Hampshire. This was odd, as it was a store Johnson typically didn't shop at. The purchases were followed by a series of additional strange transactions. On February 9th, Johnson bought 2 packs of thermal underwear in Portsmouth, one in an extra-large size and the other in a small size, which was inconsistent with his usual clothing needs. Furthermore, he used checks to make these purchases, despite the fact that his bank account had insufficient funds to cover them, a clear deviation from his normally responsible financial behavior. On February 10th, someone withdrew money from Johnson's checking account at Ocean National Bank. They took $30 from his checking and $50 from his savings, leaving only a few dollars behind. Bank tellers confirmed that the person making the withdrawals appeared to be Johnson. A few days later, on February 12th, someone used Johnson's checkbook to purchase a pair of bookshelf speakers for $100 at Radio Shack. They also made a $30 deposit on a car radio and cassette player, which had a total cost of $280. The following day, another check was written to cover the $250 balance on the car radio. Concerned by his son's silence, Johnson's father requested a welfare check from the Kittery police on February 15th. The officers arrived at Johnson's cabin and found it deserted, with no signs of life. The house had been untouched for several days, as evidenced by the fresh snow outside, which bore no footprints around the cabin. The door was unlocked, the pipes were frozen, and there was no indication that Johnson had been there for some time. Inside the cabin, many of Johnson's belongings were missing. His TV, acoustic guitar, record player, amplifier, all of his records, clothing, and valuable welding equipment were gone. The only things left behind were a set of guitar strings he had bought on February 3rd, the box for his record player and amplifier, a pair of slightly damaged stereo speakers, and his contact lenses. On the same day that the welfare check was conducted, Johnson's red 1972 Volkswagen was towed to an Exxon station in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The mechanic recognized Johnson's photo and reported that Johnson had come in for repairs, explaining that he needed to head south. It wasn't clear what going south meant, but Johnson had previously mentioned wanting to visit his sister in Georgia. However, no firm plans had been made. On February 19th, someone used Johnson's checkbook to buy groceries worth $66, and on February 21st, Johnson was seen at the Exxon station attempting to pay the repair bill by check. The mechanic refused the payment, and Johnson left the station on foot, abandoning his car. The following day, Johnson, or someone pretending to be him, contacted Donnelly Manufacturing, asking for his last paycheck to be sent to his address in Kittery. A phone call came in on February 23rd from someone claiming to be Johnson, offering to give the car to the station in exchange for the repair costs. The caller claimed he had bought the car for $1,200, even though Johnson's father had actually gifted him the car. A particularly chilling incident occurred when Johnson's parents staked out the Kittery post office, hoping their son would collect his mail. On February 23rd, Johnson's mother witnessed an unidentified man, described as having long reddish blonde hair, about 5 feet 10 inches tall, and wearing an orange t-shirt, green overalls, and a red baseball cap, open Johnson's post office box and collect his mail. The man took Johnson's paycheck but discarded other pieces of mail. When he noticed he was being watched and photographed, he covered his face, and the resulting image showed his face entirely obscured. When Johnson's mother spoke to him, the man claimed Johnson was living with him in an apartment in Portsmouth and offered to take her there. However, when Johnson's father arrived with a car to go with the man, he fled, leaving behind the paycheck that had never been cashed. The photo taken at the post office remains a key piece of evidence in the case, but the identity of the man has never been confirmed. In the months leading up to Johnson's disappearance, there had been an unusual encounter with a hitchhiker who went by the name Richard. In December 1982, Johnson picked up Richard, who claimed to be heading to Detroit or Ontario, directions completely opposite to Johnson's. Richard stayed with Johnson for over a week and was provided food and money. He left in early January 1983, arranging to be picked up by someone he knew from Massachusetts. He may have taken a copy of Johnson's house key during his stay. While Richard's involvement in Johnson's disappearance remains unclear, authorities are interested in speaking with him, as well as with Cheryl, a woman Johnson had dated in 1978, and anyone who may have known him during his time working at the Borderline restaurant in 1981. Since Johnson's disappearance in 1983, there has been no activity on his Social Security number, and his whereabouts remain a mystery. His family believes the unidentified man who collected his mail has knowledge of what happened to him. The case remains open, and law enforcement continues to search for answers. Johnson, a graduate of Trinity College in Connecticut where he studied philosophy and history, had also spent a semester abroad in Italy. His case remains unsolved, with many theories but little solid evidence. Could the strange man who took Johnson's paycheck know something? Did Johnson's hypoglycemia play a role in his sudden disappearance? Only time will tell if this mysterious case is ever solved. Shirley Moon Atwood, a 41-year-old woman from Canaan, Maine, was reported missing on July 15, 2006. She has never been heard from again, and her disappearance remains a haunting mystery. At the time of her disappearance, Shirley was estranged from her husband, Shannon Roy Atwood. The couple had been living together in a home on Route 23 in Canaan, but Shirley had recently moved out. Shannon, meanwhile, was still living in their home, now cohabiting with another woman, Cheryl Murdoch. Shirley's disappearance occurred under troubling circumstances, with authorities believing that foul play was involved. Just days after Shirley's disappearance, the situation took an even darker turn. On July 27, 2006, 12 days after Shirley went missing, Cheryl Murdoch also disappeared. Her body was found on August 11, 2006, in a wooded area off Scott Road in Canaan. She had been murdered. As law enforcement investigated Murdoch's death, they turned their attention to Shannon, who was still living in the home on Route 23. When authorities attempted to question him about Murdoch's death and search his property, Shannon barricaded himself inside the house. He threatened the officers with a bow, an arrow, and even threatened to blow up the house. The standoff ended with Shannon's arrest, and he was charged with criminal threatening, reckless conduct, and terrorizing. He was sentenced to 9 months in jail for these charges. While Shannon was in jail, authorities continued to build their case against him. In February 2007, just before he was scheduled to be released, Shannon was charged with the murders of both Cheryl Murdoch and Shirley Moon Atwood. Investigators believed that Shirley had been murdered sometime between March 15 and July 15, 2006. Shannon's criminal history only added to the suspicion surrounding him. He had a past conviction for aggravated assault on a previous girlfriend, who had stated that Shannon had attacked her and threatened to kill her, even telling her that he would bury her body in an isolated field. Authorities initially hoped to try Shannon for both women's murders at the same time, but a judge ruled that there had to be 2 separate trials. This created a prolonged legal battle. In November 2007, prosecutors made a difficult decision regarding Shirley's case. They dropped the murder charge against Shannon for Shirley's presumed death, citing insufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Although this charge was dropped, it was noted that the charge could be refiled at a later date, should new evidence come to light. Despite the setback in Shirley's case, Shannon still faced the charge of murdering Cheryl Murdoch. In July 2008, Shannon was convicted of Murdoch's murder in a bench trial. The judge sentenced him to 55 years to life in prison for the crime. The conviction, however, did little to provide closure for Shirley's family, as her case remained unresolved. At the time of her disappearance, Shirley was facing significant financial difficulties. She had inherited a considerable amount of money and property from her grandfather when she was a teenager, including the Route 23 residence where she had been living. However, in 2006, the government had placed a lien on the residence due to unpaid back taxes. This financial burden made Shirley's life even more complicated, but authorities never believed that Shirley had left voluntarily due to the lien. They suspected something far more sinister at play. Foul play is strongly suspected in Shirley's case, given the circumstances surrounding her disappearance and the subsequent events involving Shannon and Cheryl. Though Shannon was convicted of Cheryl's murder, there has been no closure regarding Shirley's case. The fact that Shannon had a history of violent behavior and was living with Cheryl Murdoch at the time of both women's disappearances has raised even more questions. Shirley's family continues to hope for justice and answers, and many believe that Shannon was involved in Shirley's death, even though the evidence was not enough to bring him to trial for it. The mystery surrounding Shirley's disappearance remains unsolved, and her case continues to haunt those who knew her. While Shannon was convicted of Cheryl Murdoch's murder, Shirley's case remains open, and her family still seeks answers. Many believe that Shannon may have played a role in both women's deaths, but the evidence necessary to prove his involvement in Shirley's murder is still lacking. The legal battles and the emotional toll on Shirley's family have only added to the tragedy of the situation. At this time, Shirley Moon Atwood's case remains unsolved. Russell Burnett was last seen on February 21, 2017, when he left a neighbor's residence on Eastbrook Road in Franklin, Maine. He had spent the night at the neighbor's house, along with his dog, Bevy, and was seen leaving early in the morning at around 7 o'clock a.m. Burnett was heading back to his home, which was about half a mile away. According to the neighbor, he was walking through the woods with Bevy in the direction of his house, but he would never be heard from again. Burnett had a doctor's appointment scheduled for the day of his disappearance. Someone was supposed to pick him up at his house, but when the ride arrived, neither Burnett nor Bevy were there. His home appeared to be undisturbed, with his cell phone, phone charger, Bible, and the jacket he had worn earlier that morning found inside. Despite these belongings being left behind, there was no sign of Russell or his dog, and he was reported missing a few days later. An extensive search of the area, including the woods where Burnett had been last seen, yielded no signs of him or Bevy. The search efforts were complicated by winter weather conditions, and the absence of a bank account or any other traceable activity made it difficult to track his whereabouts. 2 weeks after Burnett went missing, a strange development occurred. Bevy, the dog, showed up in the front yard of the neighbor's house, the very place Burnett had stayed the night before he disappeared. Bevy appeared in excellent condition, clean and well-fed, with no signs of injury or distress. This was a baffling turn of events, as it suggested that someone had been taking care of Bevy, ensuring she was in good health, yet the dog had not been wandering the woods or living outside. Bevy's sudden appearance raised more questions than answers, especially given the close bond Burnett had with her. He never went anywhere without her, which made the dog's mysterious return even more perplexing. At the time of his disappearance, Burnett was dealing with several personal struggles. The anniversary of his oldest son's death was approaching, and both of his parents were battling cancer. He had confided in a friend just days before he vanished, stating he was scared to be alone and seemed to be acting strangely. The friend, who saw him 2 days before his disappearance, described Burnett as being not in his right mind during their last conversation, adding an element of worry to an already distressing situation. Burnett's family remains deeply concerned about his fate. Given the circumstances of his disappearance and the fact that his dog appeared without him, they fear that he may no longer be alive. Despite the extensive search efforts and ongoing investigation, Russell Burnett's case remains unsolved, with no definitive answers about what happened to him or his loyal dog, Bevy. Virginia Douglas, a resident of Lexington, Massachusetts, went missing under mysterious circumstances during a trip to Bar Harbor, Maine, with her husband, Frank E. Douglas Sr., over Labor Day weekend in 1988. According to Frank, he and Virginia departed from their Massachusetts home on the evening of September 2nd, 1988, around 8:30 p.m. They were driving their dark blue 1987 Oldsmobile Cutlass with Massachusetts license plate number R1840. Their destination was Bar Harbor, Maine, but they made an impromptu stop at Rennie's Shopping Plaza in Belfast, Maine, so Virginia could use the restroom. Frank stated that Virginia entered the store but never returned. He claimed he searched the mall and parking lot, asking other shoppers if they had seen her. However, no one at the store could confirm that Virginia was ever inside. Frank then purchased women's lingerie in Virginia's size from Rennie's, telling a store clerk that it was an omen for Virginia's return. He continued searching, returning to the store about an hour later to purchase more lingerie, but Virginia had still not reappeared. Authorities soon began to question Frank's version of events. While Frank claimed Virginia preferred department store restrooms, there was a McDonald's just down the street from Rennie's, which would have been a more convenient stop. Investigators also discovered that Frank had made unusual purchases, lingerie that appeared to be for his wife, after reporting her missing. Further investigation revealed troubling evidence at the Douglas home in Massachusetts. A piece of carpet stained with Virginia's blood type and a clump of her hair were found under a doorstep, raising suspicions about the true events of her disappearance. Additionally, Virginia's family noted that she was always meticulous about closing up their home before traveling. Yet when they checked her house after she disappeared, they found the refrigerator fully stocked and the shades open, uncharacteristic behavior if she had planned a trip. One of the most glaring contradictions in Frank's story was the timeline. He claimed that he and Virginia left Massachusetts at 8:30 p.m., but at approximately 9:30 p.m., one of their children was arriving from out of state. Relatives said that Virginia would never have left without informing her child, and that Frank's timeline didn't add up. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they began to suspect that Virginia might have been murdered at her Massachusetts home rather than disappearing in Maine. The theory is that Frank might have killed Virginia at home and then disposed of her body. Virginia's children, especially 2 of her 3 children, grew increasingly suspicious of Frank. They refused to speak to him after her disappearance, and many believed he was involved. Frank, however, denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance. Despite extensive searches of the Maine and Massachusetts coastlines, no evidence of Virginia's whereabouts was ever found. Frankie Douglas Sr. eventually passed away, but Virginia's case remains unsolved. Authorities continue to investigate the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, with foul play suspected due to the inconsistencies in Frank's story and the evidence found at their home. Virginia's children held a memorial service for her in Florida in November 1988, but their mother's fate remains a mystery. Both Maine and Massachusetts police are still investigating the case, and foul play is still suspected due to the suspicious circumstances surrounding Virginia's disappearance. Ryan Blagojevich was living homeless in Portland, Maine, at the time of his disappearance. He stayed in shelters or on the streets and was known to have received Social Security disability payments, which were managed by his parents, as he had suffered a head injury in the past. Despite his struggles, he maintained regular contact with his family, reaching out to them by phone so they could wire him money wherever he was. On March 31, 2013, Easter Sunday, Blagojevich was staying at a shelter in Portland. He had been drinking and caused a disturbance, prompting the shelter staff to call the police. While the police did not arrest him, they asked him to leave the shelter. That was the last time anyone heard from him. His family, who had always been in close contact with him, grew increasingly concerned when they did not receive any communication from him after that day. Blagojevich had always kept in touch with his parents, and it was unlike him to go silent for an extended period of time. His parents, who were his payees for the Social Security benefits, began to worry, but it wasn't until early May 2013 that his sister officially reported him missing. Blagojevich's family is from the Harwich, Massachusetts area, where they still reside. Ryan had a young daughter, whose mother had been his long-term girlfriend. The couple had broken up while she was pregnant, but Ryan remained a part of his daughter's life. His family believes that due to the head injury he had sustained, Ryan would not have been able to start a new life on his own. Furthermore, they do not believe he would have taken his own life, as they knew him to be a survivor, someone who fought to maintain connections with those who cared about him. Despite their concerns, Blagojevic's family felt that law enforcement did not take his disappearance seriously. There were no searches conducted in the area where he was last seen, and his case went largely uninvestigated in the critical early months following his disappearance. As time passes, the case of Ryan Blagojevic's disappearance remains unsolved. Ludger Belanger lived in Washington, Maine with his wife, whom he had been married to for 5 years at the time of his disappearance. Together, they had 3 daughters, the youngest of whom was only 4 months old. Belanger worked as a heavy equipment mechanic, while his wife worked as a waitress to help support their family. Their life seemed stable and ordinary, but everything changed on November 25, 1975. On the morning of November 25, 1975, at around 9 a.m., Bellinger's wife and his brother dropped him off on Route 105, half a mile from their home, so he could go deer hunting. He was carrying his .30-30 rifle and told his family he would be back by noon. However, he never returned, and by the time the hours had passed, his family grew concerned and a search was launched. An extensive search was conducted, but no trace of Belanger or his rifle was found. Authorities soon determined that Belanger had shot a deer and dragged it to the roadside. It's believed that, at some point, a passing motorist picked him up, but what happened after that remains a mystery. Bellinger's wife and family had no reason to believe he would leave of his own accord. He had a good home life, a stable marriage, and a young family. His wife has always maintained that she believes he was murdered, possibly due to the deer he had shot. The idea of a violent confrontation over the deer became one of the central theories surrounding his disappearance. Authorities have 2 primary suspects in Bellinger's disappearance. One of them, a man who was involved in the case, died in an accident less than a year after Belanger went missing. The second suspect, Danny Collins Jr., is still living in Maine and remains a person of interest in the case. Collins reportedly confessed to the murder in 1977, according to a friend to whom he allegedly spoke. Collins claimed that he and the first suspect were under the influence of drugs when they picked up Belanger. According to the confession, they ultimately shot Belanger to death in the back seat of their car. Collins's friend, after hearing this confession, contacted the authorities, leading to further investigation. When investigators examined the car in which Collins and his companion allegedly transported Belanger, they found troubling evidence. The interior of the car had been thoroughly washed, and the rear seat was missing. Additionally, a single deer hair was found stuck to the hood ornament of the car, which further fueled suspicions that the deer Belanger had shot was a factor in the crime. Although both of Bellinger's parents have passed away, his wife and all 8 of his siblings remain alive and are still searching for answers about his disappearance. Bellinger's wife, who remarried after his disappearance, remains actively involved in the search for her missing husband. The case of Ludger Bellinger's disappearance remains unsolved to this day. Robert Desmond, a young boy from Kennebunk, Maine, was last seen on August 1, 1964. At the time, he was living with his mother, Alice, and stepfather, Chet, on Hovey Street. Robert was never reported missing by his parents, and it wasn't until a month later, when he failed to return to school after summer break, that anyone began to realize something was wrong. When questioned, Alice and Chet claimed that they believed Robert had run away. They told the same story to Robert's siblings, leading many to assume he had left voluntarily. According to Robert's younger sister, Dawn, the family's home life was chaotic. Chet, her stepfather, had a drinking problem and would become violent when intoxicated, often breaking furniture and assaulting family members. The police had been called to the house numerous times due to domestic disturbances. On the night of Robert's disappearance, Dawn recalled an incident where Chet became angry because the children's beds hadn't been made correctly. Dawn's older sister hid her in a bedroom closet, telling her not to come out until the shouting stopped. Dawn fell asleep in the closet, and when she awoke, everything was quiet. Her sister had fled the house using a rope made from a sheet. Dawn ventured into another bedroom, where she saw Robert lying on the floor, dressed only in his underwear and unresponsive. She tried to drag him into the closet, but he was too heavy for her. That's when their mother, Alice, appeared, becoming angry at Dawn for disturbing the scene. Alice then dragged Dawn by the foot, took her down to the basement, and locked her in a wooden crate. Dawn screamed and tried to escape, but was unable to. The following morning, Dawn was back in her bed and unsure whether the events of the previous night had been a bad dream. However, when she went downstairs, Alice showed her that money had gone missing from her purse and that the front door was open. Alice claimed that Robert had stolen the money and run away. After this, Alice told Dawn to eat her breakfast, and they never spoke about Robert again. Dawn stated that for years following Robert's disappearance, the family never mentioned his name. Photos of Robert disappeared from the home, and when Dawn eventually asked her mother about him, Alice's response was, "I don't know what you think you know, but you're wrong." Chet refused to speak about Robert at all. Dawn explained that due to the trauma of her childhood, she didn't even recall the events surrounding Robert's disappearance until she was 17 years old. After Robert vanished, the family moved out of their home on Hovey Street. In 1968, the basement floor of the house was cemented over. In 1976, authorities dug up the cement floor in a search for Robert's remains, but they only uncovered a pair of eyeglasses and some animal bones, no signs of Robert. The investigation stalled, and eventually, Robert's missing persons case was closed, archived, and the file was destroyed. However, the case was later reopened, and a new detective was assigned to investigate the circumstances of Robert's disappearance. Both Alice and Chet have since passed away, but Robert's 3 siblings are still alive and remain determined to learn what happened to him. Despite the passage of time, Robert Desmond's disappearance remains a mystery, and his case is still unsolved. Douglas Chapman, a young child from Alfred, Maine, was last seen outside of his family's mobile home on Alfred Gore Road on the morning of June 2, 1971. At 10:30 a.m., Douglas, then just 4 years old, was playing in a sandpile about 25 yards from the residence. His mother was inside the home, talking on the telephone, unaware of the events unfolding just outside. When she eventually went outside to check on her son, Douglas was gone. An immediate search was launched, involving hundreds of volunteers, but no trace of the child was found. The area around the Chapman home is rural, with dense woods, swamps, and brush. Initially, authorities believed Douglas may have wandered off and become lost, but as time passed, the search revealed no evidence to support this theory. His disappearance began to seem increasingly suspicious. Police tracker dogs were brought in to search for any trace of the child. The dogs followed Douglas's scent through a field, past an apple orchard, across a farm, and down a driveway leading to a main road. However, the scent trail abruptly ended there. This strange stop led Douglas's father, who was an auxiliary police officer at the time, to speculate that his son might have been picked up by someone in a vehicle at that location. One other odd detail that added to the mystery was the behavior of Douglas's dog. The family dog did not bark when the child disappeared, a reaction that his mother found deeply unsettling. This led her to question whether something more sinister had occurred, as it was unlike the dog to remain silent in such circumstances. Douglas's case remained unsolved for many years, until it was reopened in 1993 at the request of his father. By that time, his parents had divorced, and his mother had moved to New York. Despite the reopening of the case, no new substantial leads were uncovered. All of Douglas's family members have been ruled out as suspects, leaving law enforcement with few answers. Douglas's father continues to believe that his son was abducted and murdered by an offender who lived in the area at the time. Unfortunately, that person has since passed away, adding a further layer of frustration to the ongoing search for answers. The circumstances surrounding Douglas Chapman's disappearance remain unresolved to this day, and his case continues to haunt his family. Jessie Hoover, a young woman from Texas, disappeared on May 20th, 1983, while attempting to hike the Appalachian Trail in Maine, a well-known long-distance trail that spans the East Coast from Maine to Georgia. She was last seen at the Baxter State Park headquarters in Millinocket, Maine, where she had traveled to explore the trail. Hoover was unfamiliar with the area and had little experience with hiking. She was unprepared for the rigorous conditions of the trail, lacking essential hiking gear and carrying only about $15 or $20 in cash. Additionally, she planned to wire money home and pick up prescriptions as she passed through towns on her journey. On May 20th, Hoover aimed to climb Mount Katahdin, the northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail, but park rangers refused her permission to proceed due to her lack of preparation and inadequate supplies. Instead, she was last seen at the trailhead of the 100-mile wilderness, a particularly remote and challenging stretch of the Appalachian Trail. Despite being advised to carry 8 to 10 days' worth of food, Hoover only had some beef jerky. At the time, the temperatures reached a high of 72 degrees during the day, but at night, they dropped to around 30 degrees, with rain adding to the harsh conditions. These extreme factors, combined with her inadequate gear and supplies, made Hoover highly vulnerable to hypothermia. Hoover's sister reported her missing on July 11th, nearly 2 months after she was last seen. An extensive search was conducted in the area, but no trace of Hoover was found. No other hikers along the trail recalled seeing her, and authorities were unable to determine what happened to her. Jessie Hoover's case remains unsolved. Despite the passage of time, questions surrounding her disappearance, whether she became lost, succumbed to the harsh environment, or met with foul play, remain unanswered.